So I just wanted to tell you about a feature that I'm pretty excited about from Compatibility Matrix that's going to help you improve the security of your application when you're presenting it to your end customer to run in their environments. And this feature lets you test in air-gap environments and also report on network activity. So the context for this is that you're going to be working with customers that have network restricted and air-gapped environments. We find that across our vendors, because of the end deployment scenarios, government, finance, healthcare, quite a few of our vendors have an air-gap deployment option, which we think is also just representative of the larger environment. And beyond air-gapped, there's also a very common scenario of network restricted environments where there's particular allow lists that the enterprise customer is maintaining, which you as the vendor have to contend with. And similar to a lot of our other approaches with our security center and enterprise portal, we believe that getting in front of these challenges and being very proactive in presenting your own context for exactly how your application is going to run in those end environments puts you in a really good position for those conversations that lead to really smooth installations. And so we want to help you do that with this tooling. So just to give a little bit of context, this feature is part of Compatibility Matrix. Now, Compatibility Matrix allows you to very quickly create ephemeral VMs and clusters that just let you install your application for a variety of testing scenarios. And in some of these cases, you're just trying to understand what happens when you install your application in a certain environment. We have the ability to let you customize across the OS you're running. You can run a bare VM where it's just you got an OS, and then whatever you want to install in that VM is up to you. Really good setup for testing the end-to-end install experience for, let's say, embedded cluster. But we also have preset clusters that come up really quickly for you across all the popular cloud providers, and some clusters are very popular in enterprise environments such as OpenShift. The customization here of the environment in terms of simulating the infrastructure they're eventually going to deploy into helps you really quickly understand what's going to happen when your application is installed in that end customer environment. And one of the things that we first wanted to give you a lot of coverage of was across Kubernetes distributions and versions. So now with this addition of network policy and network reporting, this is extending it to something that's also an extremely common scenario that we see our vendors running into, but we want to just make it much easier for you to simulate that scenario for your own testing and also get detailed reports so you can understand how to mitigate and update your application so it runs really well in those environments. So I want to distinguish for a moment between two facets of this functionality. One is the network policy, and the other is network reports. So for the policy, this basically updates the environment that your application is being installed in, this test environment provided through Compatibility Matrix, so that it's air-gapped. Right now we have air-gap mode or open mode. So if you just want to simulate what's going to happen for your application, what kind of failure states it might get into, air-gap mode is a really quick way to test that. And this is in combination of reporting, it gives you more than just turning off the Wi-Fi or simulating not having any internal egress. Because what the reports does is that it will analyze all of the network egress that happens when your application is running inside that cluster, capturing all of the outbound calls. Now, when your application is running, there's often inter-pod communication, which can be very noisy. We don't collect those. This is primarily around the use case of helping you communicate with those end customers that really want to know for sure that your application is not going to be pinging outside of their network, or for the use case of coming up with an allow list to abide by. Not internal traffic, just outbound network calls. And what we're doing here, which I think is quite valuable, is analyzing not only the query, but also the response. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment, but this gives you more useful information for iterating on your application, because our presumption is that, at least for some of you, it may be possible that if you haven't really tested inside this environment, you might be surprised about what kind of network calls happen. It's not just what your application is doing, but all of its dependencies, and it's something that can evolve over time. More about that later. So in the report mode, we can stream events, and also we will summarize the events for you so that you get at a glance something that can help you generate that allow list, or just understand when you're running this in CI whether there's any violation outside of a set list, whether that's a restricted allow list or whether it's air gapped. So to just give you a bit of a mental model of this, imagine that we got the VM, and then inside the VM, there's a cluster, there's a pod with your process that has some kind of network egress. The policy, the first like simulation thing that I just talked to you about, is what blocks, makes it so that the function will not be able to exit the network. However, we run a probe which analyzes that request. So that's a value add in a way, because if you were just merely blocking all egress, you might not get like the useful information to understand where that request originated from, where it's going to, which helps you answer the question of, is this something legit that is critical for my application to function? Or is this something that I need to make sure that this customer will never see that functionality that does that, or otherwise mitigate? So to dive in a little bit more about how this functions, there's, for network policy, the ability to update the network so that you can toggle what the policy is between air gap or open. And then for the report, there's a couple of steps here. You want to enable the collection of the report on a given cluster. Again, once we start collecting the report, we're really analyzing all of these network events. We're gathering all of this data. There's an upper limit to how much data we can collect. So you have to actually actively enable reporting. And then once you've collected that report, you can view the report that's streaming when the cluster or the VM is running, or you can watch what, yeah, I guess that's the watch mode, or you can output the report. That's what I meant to say. So again, the policy is what blocks all network egress in the environment that you're running in, and the report is what allows you to view all that network egress. And those things can be toggled independently of each other. So to dive in a little bit more on exactly what we capture, we get for each event that is egress, that's not just internal traffic, we get the source destination IP port, source and destination pod can, and then for the summary, when we look over all of the data that's been collected over the duration that you've been running your report, we understand what domains were attempted to be connected to and the destinations that resolved into those domains. So this is a feature that if you just go into your vendor portal right now, go into Compatibility Matrix and look in the sidebar, you'll see all of the VMs and the clusters that you have running on which you can toggle reporting on and off. Since Compatibility Matrix is all about ephemeral resources, there's a little bit of a caveat there, which is you can toggle reporting as long as the resource is actually still active. Once the resource reaches its time to live, or its TTL, then no more reporting on that. So if you didn't collect a report there, then a report won't be available. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about how we at Replicated are using this network report functionality to make sure that embedded cluster itself does not ever have any unexpected network egress as part of all of the code that we have that makes embedded cluster function. So as part of our end-to-end testing, we access this functionality basically through the commands that I just reviewed with you: network replicated, network update. This is some Go testing code. But then once we have updated it to collect the report, remember that we have to turn on the report to actually have it available. Then after running whatever you need to run, the report will be available to output. So the report can be matched up once you have finished running the report and we've had time to analyze all of the domains and the IPs that we discovered egress related to. You can test it against your list of allowed domains that you specify and find, did this violate the expected list? So here we have for embedded cluster, limited set of allowed domains. Depending on what your customer end environment is, it may be many more. In the allow list, it may be many less, just for a pure air gap scenario. And we actually very recently just had a situation where in running this exact end-to-end test, unexpectedly there was a unallowed domain. So again, like I said, it may not be something that one of the engineers or your organization has explicitly added as a functionality. Sometimes it may be an unintended effect of updating a dependency. So this is something that's both at the very beginning of your workflow in thinking about creating your first releases for your customers can be something very helpful to iterate and understand what is happening with your application and mitigate it so that there's no unintended network egress whatsoever. But also, if you integrate this into your CI, you can ensure that over time, you're going to maintain that standard. And this is exactly the type of thing that really builds a lot of trust with the end customer. So to review, this functionality lets you test in those environments for a more iterative experience where you can toggle it on and off. You can get that visibility through these reports into what's happening with your application. You can integrate this and you can build trust. Really excited for you to use this functionality, incorporate it, help us make it better by giving feedback. This is something we're still actively iterating on. But I also wanted to give a little bit of a bonus update here, which is we are currently updating a compatibility matrix so that its interface will be more reflective of this model of simulating your end customer environment. So this is the current design that kind of shows clusters and VMs. And in the updated design, we have a more clear VM and cluster creation dialog, which really shows you the relationship between what is available and what is the different combinations that you can select. Pardon some of this fake data inside my development environment, but this is something that we're going to be launching soon. And overall, our hope is to make it much easier for you to simulate your end customer environment before your application actually has to install in that environment.